For the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk about a topic I'm really passionate about. And I've been working with Copilot Studio since almost the very beginning. So if you recall, back in about November 2023-ish, I believe, is when Microsoft rebranded Power Virtual Agents into Copilot Studio. For anyone who's been around for that time, or first of all, was anybody using this when it was called Power Virtual Agents? Anyone in the room?
Yes, I was using it when it was Power Virtual Agents, but after that I didn't have such projects that required
Yeah.
me to build agents. So yeah.
So one of the things that was very interesting about Power Virtual Agents was that it was extremely topic driven. It was very deterministic. And yes, there were some AI components within it, but largely the idea was wherever you wanted the conversation to go, you would have to create a topic construct. And in the topic, you would describe what type of how the conversation would go. You would ask the questions, you would interpret the entities, et cetera, et cetera. And then shortly thereafter, before it became Copilot Studio, towards the very end, they'd already started adding a lot of generative AI capability, and then it became Copilot Studio. So a lot of these best practices started off initially by trying to circumvent and to try to overcome some of the issues that were available in the early stage product. But as the product improved, so too did my content for this session. So I think from the 5 best practices that I will share with you today, there's maybe one of them that it was still there the very first version of the session that I presented. So I keep improving and I keep iterating on this content and I keep adding new stuff for everybody's collective benefit. My name is AJ Ansari. I'm a Microsoft MVP. By day, I am the Chief Operating Officer, and I co-own a Microsoft partner here in Houston, Texas, in the United States, called DSWI. We focus on Business Central, Dynamics 365 Business Central, the Power Platform, and within it specifically Copilot Studio and Power Automate and Power BI. I'm also the creator of a AI decision framework called the AI Clarity Method that helps chief executive officers, chief IT officers, and CIOs go about a sane and planned method into identifying projects that need solutions and identifying which of those solutions can or should be handled with AI. And you can visit ClarityMethod.ai. And I also have a news tech, Copilot Studio, and Copilot Help and Tips website and YouTube content page called Only Copilot Fans. So you can go to onlycopilotfans.com or you can search for that on YouTube. Now, I am part Turkish. So while in conversation I can speak in Turkish quite well, I do struggle with presenting in Turkish, which is why I'm here talking to you in English, which is maybe a little bit more my native language to begin with. Best way to get a hold of me is LinkedIn. You see that QR code over there. Towards the end of my screen, I'm going to have that again. You can also search for me by name on LinkedIn. I invite you to connect with me. If you're shy and you don't have any questions to ask right now, or you're too shy to ask questions right now, find me on LinkedIn later. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you and answer anything that you want to know, or just talk about Copilot Studio, Power Automate, or even Formula One. A huge Formula One fan. So without further ado, let's get in and let's talk a little bit about our 5 best practices. Now, the first one that I want to start, as soon as you hear it, and I leave this as my first tip because people look at this and go, really, this is your tip? Help your users start where you're with, help your users understand where to start. And then you're going to look over here and you're going to hear the word conversation starters. And you are going to feel very inclined to say, well, suggested prompts or conversation starters are a standard part of Copilot Studio. Yes, they are. But if you look closely, those are only going to be available to you in agents that you deploy in M365 Copilot or to some extent in Microsoft Teams. So if you've kind of looked at how they look at, and I'm going to bring a quick browser over, in M365 Copilot, if you deploy an agent and you have suggested prompts, they appear like this at the bottom of your screen, or in Microsoft Teams, they appear right over here as some of the things that you could choose from. But what happens when you're actually working in an agent that is not one of these 2 deployments? If you're going to be deploying your agent inside of a web app, inside of a native app, or kind of web app, native app, website, or any of those other deployment mechanisms, Starter prompts or suggested prompts do not work. You could populate anything you want, but it's not there. So I've come up with a mechanism that really helps. And the users of the agents that we create, that's one of your favorite things because they get an idea of what the agent can do for them. So how do we go about this process? And what we're trying to achieve is we want to seed the conversation start system topic. So in Copilot Studio, whenever your conversation starts, it goes with a system topic called conversation start. And that system topic looks a little bit like this. So if I were to go in to my agents, not agents, excuse me, into my topics, I have a little conversation start topic, which will look like on conversation start, and then there is a message variant that it's going to have in here on what it's going to do for you. So this is where you can ask. It's just like, or it will have something like, "Hello, how are you?" or "My name is," and it identifies itself, and you would be able to go from there. So what can you do over there then? What you'll be able to do is use quick replies, and within the quick replies option, you could have a multiple choice type of scenario that people can pick from. And so it would give them 3 or 4 things to choose from. And then based on what they click, you would be able to generate a conversation starter and start answering those questions. And you would normally use the generative answer node. And with the generative answer node, you'll find that it gives you some great flexibility into doing exactly what you want to have answered. So let's take an example of this first in my slides, and then I'm going to show you this deployed in a live scenario. So here I have a conversation start topic, and this is taken on a very old version of Copilot Studio, so you don't really see that redirect now. We're just going to go ahead and go to a different topic. But what we're doing is right below the standard node, I am redirecting it to go to a different topic. Now, of course, I could have added everything I wanted right in here, but one of the things I preach to anybody building agents is try not to make a lot of changes to system topics. Try to use the hook concept. So if you do want it to go down a different path, create one hook, create one redirect, or call another topic, and have everything you want happen in that other topic that you're calling. And so then on the other topic, you will find I've got this little roadmap that it kind of goes down a different set of paths. So it starts with asking a questions. What would you like to discuss? Here are some options that it's going to show in this example. And then for each option, you can have different questions being asked. Now, in this example, I said, if this is the topic, then there's a question that is going to ask, what would you like to know in this case? So if the user says, I want to talk about Copilot Studio, it will go down this choice and say, oh, that's my favorite topic to talk about. What would you like to know? And then there's another turn where the user asks the questions. Now, there may be times where you do not need to ask the user what they want to know. You almost want to have a prompt be iterated or generated and for that prompt to be injected into the conversation. And for those of you who've played with Copilot Studio, you know that prompt injection in that way is not necessarily possible. It is in some ways possible inside of the prompt builder, but the prompt builder is very limited in its scope for certain things like this. So what do you do then? Let's take a look at what I've done in this particular agent deployment. So for my AI Clarity Method website, this is an agent that hasn't fully been deployed yet. I'm building an agent that's going to be deployed as a web app. So what we've done over here, you'll notice as soon as a conversation starts, it says, hey, here are some topics. I'm clear. How can I help? Here are some topics I can help with. And there are 3 different bubbles that show up right here. Now, what I do recommend is for these bubbles that are going to show, do not make them very wordy. Because if you have a lot of words or a lot of different options, you will find that in some deployments, it's going to show a scroll, and you'll be able to scroll from left to right to see all the other choices. And in some, it's actually going to cut off. So you want to test this in whatever environment you're deploying it in and try to use as few words as possible. Now, notice what happens if I say the 4 quadrants. It's not going to ask the user anything. It's actually going to inject a prompt. Ooh, I love it when things break, right? So let's go back and try a different one. Maybe the knowledge source just wasn't right or there. And so here it got the answer, and it showed what's going on. So how do we do this in this particular instance? Same thing like I showed you in my screenshots with conversation start. We had the standard message, then this called or invoked a topic by going to topic management and go to another topic, right? And we pointed it to another topic we'd created called starter prompts. So let's go ahead and view this topic. Starter prompts started with a trigger. The standard trigger is usually going to be not this one, right? So you want to say it is redirected to, or it's redirected to. So you click on this, choose this option, and then this ensures that this trigger, this topic is never going to be picked by the orchestrator, by the AI orchestration, ever outside of it being invoked specifically by another topic. Now in here, I have a little question node, so a very simple question node. And I said, here are some topics I can help with. And for identify, I chose multiple choice options as my entity. And then I created 3 options, 3-step process, the 4 quadrants, who's this for. We stored this as a simple variable. It's a choice type of variable. And so in here, then it automatically creates the 3 or 4 conditions that we're going to jump within. Now, here's what I've done that's a little bit different than my screenshot. So I said, if somebody says something about the 3-step process, then we are going to actually set a variable. So we're going to initialize a variable, because what I want to do is create a generative answer. Anytime I create a generative answer, it's going to require an input. And the input cannot be a choice. The input has to be a string kind of variable. So we do a set variable. We just make one called starter prompt 1 or whatever you want to call. And I typed in a simple question here. What is the 3-step process in the AI clarity method? So now this, even though it's not visible to the user, it's a prompt that will be injected into the conversation. This will be used as the input for create generative answers, which is found under advanced. And down here, it's going to then answer from whatever data sources are available to it. So simply by doing this kind of a deployment, as soon as the conversation starts, anytime you invoke a conversation, you'll find it's going to come in and it will start asking this. Now, how does this look like in a deployed scenario? I believe I published this today before we got on the call. So let's go in and look at this in a demo website. I do not have any authentication associated with my demo website, so it shouldn't ask me for anything here. But notice over here it says, "Hello, I'm Claire. How can I help?" And then down over here it says these 3 things that it can answer. I click one, and it should start answering the questions. So this is a good idea. Now, I should point out that over here in the demo website deployment, Microsoft is showing some suggested prompts that were available when I created the agent. But you will notice this is only for the demo website, because Microsoft, in fact, I think they came up with some demo website questions right over here. I didn't even have them over here. So these won't actually appear in a standard website deployment. You're really only going to see this part. So this is that first step. Every time I've done this for a customer deployment, this has really increased satisfaction, and I recommend you do the same. So this takes us to topic number 2. And by the way, while I'm on the topic of topics from number 1, do not sleep on topics. A lot of people in the new age of AI or agentic AI development, Copilot Studio, I notice rarely ever use topics. They focus a lot on the tools. They focus a lot around instructions, which I have some conversation thoughts and starters about as well. And they don't use topics very much. Topics can be a very essential part of your agent, and I'll show you in tip 3 or 4 again where they really shine and can make a huge difference. So train your agents. In fact, this is the second one. This is where the topics are going to come up again. For anyone that's worked with Copilot Studio and you're not leveraging a model from the Microsoft Foundry, you know that you don't really have a way to train or fine-tune the model that you're working with. So if you're working in a Copilot Studio agent, you will be able to choose what model you want to use, and really it stops over there. Well, the only other thing you have, if you go back to the settings over here, is you can moderate or change the content moderation level, but even that isn't going to give you a lot of flexibility in what you want to do. So what you can do is use instructions in a very creative way to have it overcome, or to kind of learn to teach it things that it doesn't want to learn. I come back to another variant of this again later in my tips. So prioritize preferred knowledge sources. What you'll notice too in Copilot Studio is there is no way for you to prioritize where it gets its answers from. So if you have a variety of tools or skills that you've given the agent, you have your tools, which are connectors, Power Platform connectors, MCP connectors. You have knowledge sources, and you have topics. Now, what you know, or if you don't, what you should know is the first thing that your agent will try to fit any type of question into is a topic. It will look through topics. If it finds a matching topic, it will look and go in there. If it doesn't find a topic, then it decides where it's going to get its answer from. If there are 3 or 4 knowledge sources, it will choose whichever knowledge source it's going to get the answer from. And as a matter of fact, 3 people can build agents with identical knowledge sources, and Copilot Studio may surface answers from one knowledge source for person A, from another knowledge source for person B, and some combination of knowledge sources for person C. And this can create a real situation of frustration. So here's a way you can overcome all of this problem. So what are we doing? When your agent struggles to give you a perfect answer, you can take topics, and within topics, you can actually get it to forcibly use a specific knowledge source to get your outcomes. So let's take a look at what's going on over here. And this comes in handy a lot of times when I'm doing RAG patterns implementation, and when my RAG pattern has 2 or 3 different knowledge sources which have an overlap. So if I'm working with documentation for Dynamics 365, I've got one documentation source from learn.microsoft.com and another source of documentation that can be an ebook or something else. Now I've got multiple things that are all answering about Dynamics 365. But maybe for a certain topic, I have one that is very strong and is more authoritative. So what do we do here? So create a topic, very simple. And what you're going to do over here on the trigger is say this topic is triggered when the user asks a question about. So whatever it is where the agent is getting an answer from the wrong place, you're going to have this topic trigger over there. And then you are going to create another node called generative answers, but here you are going to change the data sources. By the way, does everybody here know what activity.txt is? All right, I'm not hearing anything, so I'll just explain briefly. Whenever I do my Copilot Studio bootcamps, I tell people there's 3 or 4 system variables everybody should know, system or environment variables. One of them is activity.txt. Activity.txt is the last entered prompt from the user. So whatever happened or came from the user on the last turn. So if I'm feeding something into a topic, the user asked a question, I don't want to ask the user again once the topic starts, what would you like to know? So what I will do is trigger the topic, and then the variable activity.txt is going to store that last question from the user. Similarly, there is another one called bot.name. So if you ever want to reference the bot's name, you can use that. There's another one called user.email. I use that a lot in certain situations where I need to send an email directly to the user without asking them, what is your email address? We can save them a little bit of time. This is especially valuable when you're using the standard authentication method. So notice what is happening over here is it creates a generative answer, but I say select only or search only selected knowledge sources. So over here, what you're going to notice is instead of choosing all of them, I have 3 knowledge sources around Business Central or Dynamics 365 Business Central. One is from Microsoft Learn. Another one is a document that we've uploaded into SharePoint, which is called the Business Central Field Guide. And the third one is specifically around APIs for Business Central. It is a specific book, and this has the most in-depth content around APIs. So instead of having the answers come from here or here, where there will be some information, but not nearly as deep, I force it to come from this topic. So very simple, one topic, one trigger. The trigger, you will say this topic is triggered when you describe as clearly as possible and capture as much as possible. And then you have a generative answer node where you put in the activity.txt, edit the data source, search only selected sources, and select 1 or 2. And this will ensure that your answer is coming only from that source. As soon as you run this particular prompt gets run for APIs, you will notice in the activity pane that it is going to look only at the topic and will give you your perfect answers. So check this out. This has also been a real lifesaver. Other places where this comes in is when you have I think a good example comes to mind is with, again, in Dynamics 365, if you have an agent that is both providing information on how to do something, and then you also have some tools that allow the user to perform a CRUD operation like create, read, update, delete. So if the user gives an inaccurate prompt and it says, or a very ambiguous prompt that says create a customer. Now the agent may be confused. Does the user want to know how to create a customer, or does the user want to know, does the user want to create a customer? Even for those types of situations, you can actually create a topic like this, and then go down the multiple choice option, or you can use the on intent recognition system topic as well. I prefer to use something like this over here. I ask the user, do you want to know how to create a customer, or do you want to create a customer? And if they say, I want to know how to create a customer, then I go to specific knowledge sources that contain the answer to that question. Now we'll jump to number 3. At the end, I will answer your questions as well. If you have any, keep the, you can either type them in for now, or just raise your hand afterwards. This is another way of training the agent. So this is part 2, but it's a skill in its own right. Once again, we go back to the fact that you cannot train a model in Copilot Studio. So you then have to have workarounds. If you have a situation where you have a knowledge source or you have a, how would I put it, like a website that has a list of information. But you notice whenever you're asking one question about something from the website, it is constantly giving you the wrong answer, either because that page is not properly indexed, the information is ambiguous, or you just can't explain why. So you need to tell your agent that anytime somebody asks a specific question, do not answer from the standard website, go to another source and always get the information over there. So what we have done in this particular example is I've created a memory document. So let's take a look at what's going on over here. So if you want the agent to remember and learn and from mistakes, it's kind of like emulating what ChatGPT and some other tools, now Copilot's also trying to do, the memory area, where the memory remembers certain things about you in conversation. So you create a fallback knowledge source, and it's nothing very strong, or it's not nothing more complicated. You're going to see what I do over here. And all this fallback knowledge source does, it's a list of bullet points or a table, and each row or each bullet point addresses one thing that the agent constantly keeps getting wrong. And you can keep adding to this knowledge source manually, or even systemically if you want to later. Now, this then becomes the pathway. So what you're going to then do is, under tools, you will create a pathway for the agent to use this new knowledge. So let's see what I've done in this particular scenario. Let's go to a model training agent that I've created. Now, in this particular example, I'm going to go to my own company's website, dswius.com, and it will show, when I go to the About page, my business partner's information. It's going to show my information, and then it's going to show my sales director and my practice director. So you would expect that if somebody was asking a question about us, it would actually list us as the people that are there. Now, let's assume for the sake of argument that this information is incorrect and the website has not been updated, and we want the users to get the correct information. So what we can do is, in the agent, I've made a simple knowledge source called correction to errors in knowledge sources. And this particular document, see if I can quickly download this and show what this looks like. Corrections to errors and other knowledge sources refer to the information in this document for updates and corrections. So the first one says that the leadership at DSWI is not made up of. It is made up of Bob Jones and Tina Smith only. And then also revenue, if somebody asks questions about revenue, then the revenue isn't properly stored. And then in the area for instructions, I've created said, look at the knowledge sources to answer questions about DSWI. The knowledge source titled so-and-so, and it addresses inaccuracies. Now, for anybody who has used references in agents, you'll notice that you can use for references at this point, you can use topics, tools, invoke another agent or variable knowledge sources by themselves cannot be invoked. So, or at least not dynamically invoked. So what you can do is put in double quotes and reference the knowledge source exactly as it's stated. And your agent is actually pretty smart about it. So then I can say, who are the leadership team at DSWI. So it's going to check the website, then it's also going to check the Word document, and it says these are the people, and then else says, hey, please note that the previous blah, blah, blah are incorrect. So this is a good way for you to overcome issues that you're finding with your knowledge sources. This is especially helpful when you are using a knowledge source that you do not control. So you're maybe getting something from learn.microsoft.com or some third-party website or a document that's printed PDF'd and you don't have the ability to edit that. Instead of finding a way to change a 500-page document, you can create these types of overcoming Word document corrections and have this as a living, breathing document that serves to constantly train the agent on things that are going on. The fourth one, don't sleep on your descriptions or really even instructions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both the descriptions and the instructions. This is where I find whenever I'm troubleshooting agents for my customers, half of the problems are poorly created descriptions. The AI orchestrator heavily depends on instructions and descriptions, right? Those two are king, because the way AI orchestration works is every time a prompt comes up, if you have MCP tools, it's going to initialize the MCP tools. MCP tools do not have descriptions because they self-describe themselves through the tools in the context that they provide. It's then going to look at any tools that are available or any knowledge, and every single time it kind of picks up one ball from the box, it looks at it and says, is this good? Is this not the right thing? If it is, I'm going to use it. And if it needs to build a plan, a dynamic plan, it's going to take multiple things. So you sometimes also need to remember that in a description, that if this tool or knowledge plays well with another tool or knowledge, you might want to describe them together as well, like in a way that makes sense. So you'll notice over here, whenever you have topic orchestration, you want to make sure that you're describing this as description instead of trigger phrase. By the way, let me explain this very quickly, why I highlighted this point. If for some reason you create a topic and you don't see this type of a box where it says describe what the topic does, and instead it says show trigger phrases, go and check settings and validate that you do not have classic orchestration. Classic orchestration is also known as manual orchestration. You'll find this as an option over here. You'll also find this as an option, unless they've moved that. It used to be down here as well on the homepage. I think they've moved that. At one point in time, we used to have a toggle for AI orchestration on or off. So if you turn that off, then it's manual orchestration. Manually orchestrated agents will say, show a list of trigger phrases. I'm actually going to break my agent for a second here. Probably not the smartest thing to be doing, but for the sake of our presentation, let's go ahead and now topic, add a topic from blank. Now it's going to ask you to list phrases. So if you, for some reason, end up in this scenario where it's asking you to identify with 4 or 5 trigger phrases, then know that your AI orchestration is off. It can still generate answers that are generative, but it will not be able to create a dynamic orchestration plan. So you will want to make sure you don't do what I just did over here. So that's one place where descriptions are really important in topics. Make sure you explain when this topic is to be triggered. The last thing you want is for a lot of stuff to fall through this topic. Anytime you have a topic being triggered, you want it to do for very specific narrow scope situations. If it's going to capture a lot of different scenarios and do it in one topic, you're really not allowing the AI orchestration to shine. Also, for knowledge sources, explain clearly what each knowledge source is about. Don't use the default way Microsoft references knowledge sources. I will often say this website is the official documentation for Microsoft Dynamics 365. Or if it's Business Central, I will say Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. Why that matters is if this documentation actually has more information than just Business Central, when I ask a question, the orchestrator knows that I'm contextually interested in Business Central, and it actually does a really good job of filtering out things that are irrelevant from the documentation search. Next thing, also with actions, make sure that your actions are properly described, or your tools, as properly as they're called now, are well described. A good example when you're working with CRUD operations, if I'm working with, let's take an example over here, go into my tools, and I will stick with the Business Central family of examples since I use Business Central a lot. Dynamics 365, Business Central. And there is an option here called Find Records. Now, Find Records doesn't stipulate what table it's going to get the records from. So I want to show you the default description that it comes up with. Taking a little bit of time. Retrieves Business Central records of a certain type, for example, customers or items. This is going to not tell the orchestrator specifically what table the records are going to be pulled from. The name, by the way, is just for your own benefit, for the maker's benefit or anybody else's editing. But I would probably, if I'm pulling data from the customer table, I would specifically say this tool retrieves a list of customer records from Business Central, or list record of table records from the customer table in Business Central, or something along those lines. Now, this doesn't always work, but at times I've also had success by saying this only pulls customers of a certain type, and then it will also try to create a filter down here instead of me creating a manual filter. But these are not reliable. Anytime you're trying to do filtering and so on, you'll have better luck doing it through instructions. And I have one on instructions. I'm going to show you some really cool things that you can do with that, with instructions along the way. Now, at this point, you go in and populate the rest of the stuff. You probably give it a better name. And now my tool specifically brings out, or it gets invoked in the right place. This is even more important if I'm going to use a combination of a standard Power Platform connector and an MCP tool for the exact same application or backend. So for Business Central, for instance, or even for Office 365 Outlook, email management, etc., there are both standard connectors and there are the MCP connectors. So what happens with an MCP connector, for instance, down here, you will notice that it just has, let me just pick a particular thing. Until I do that, it won't show me the tools. All right, I'm having a little bit of a problem over here with the connector. There must be something going on. But here, the tools are going to be like, find records, add a record, and so on and so forth and so forth. If I don't want to use one of the tools like finding records, and I want to use my manual connector, I can turn that tool off. And now the MCP tool will no longer do anything with finding records from tables, but it can do and update a record or create a record. And now my other tool, the standard connector with a proper description, will get kicked in. Once again, MCP tools don't have a description. So just keep those types of things in mind when you're working with it. Now, generative AI, I think I was just recapping over here that it uses its descriptions and instructions to intelligently orchestrate conversation choosing between all of these different tools that it has at its disposal. Next one is data collection. Now, if you're creating an agent and your agent is connected to a backend system like Dynamics 365, and you are trying to get it to add a new record, here's what the behavior is going to look like. I will create a connector. Let's go into Copilot Studio. And let's, in fact, go into one of my agents that I have that is fit for this purpose. I think I opened it ahead of time. or at least I thought I did. I have an adaptive card gallery type of thing that I've created. You know what? Let me just go ahead and make one from start because I can't remember how this one was set up to work. So now if I go to an agent and I said, I want to connect to Business Central and I want to enter a customer record. So let's go in very quickly and I'll add a tool. And create a record and configure. In the customer table. For now, I'm just going to say maker provided credentials will save me a little bit of time. And let's quickly populate these values. And we want to create a record in the customer table. Now here I can add some different fields that I want to include when the user is populating it. I want to know the name, or description, I think is what it's called. That's why it's not, or just doesn't want to search. That's fine. Display name, and we'll have that dynamically populated, and credit limit, and then I'll stop with that. We're not going to go too crazy. Create a new customer in Business Central. Now, what would normally happen if I had 5 or 10 fields that I needed to add, it would ask me either one by one, what is the name? What is the, so it's like, what is the name of the item? And then I'd type in, Bob's fried chicken. And then it would ask me something else. And I would then have to say, what is the credit limit that you want to set for the record? So this is step by step by step, and it can create multiple different steps that we have to work with. It really slows down the process for the user, and it's going to not be very intuitive. The more fields that you need to have the user populate, the more difficult it's going to be. So what you want to do is you want to create adaptive cards. Adaptive cards are really helpful. It's kind of like what you get when you're using your phone to board a flight. If for anybody who's not familiar with them, this is an example of an adaptive card that just contains information or displays it that I'm bringing up on the camera if you're seeing it. An adaptive card can also be used for data collection. Now, you do have to know some JSON to be able to write this, but if you don't, just go to Copilot or ChatGPT or Gemini and describe. Tell it that you're creating an adaptive card v1.5. That is a version supported by Copilot Studio. Write a simple prompt that says, I need to create an adaptive card that will collect data for the following fields: the display name, the credit limit, and tell what each data type is for the field, the 5 or 6 you need, and add a submit button. And give me the JSON payload. And as soon as you do that, it's going to give you that, and you're going to copy and paste that into an adaptive card node. Now, what does this look like implemented inside of an agent? For this, I do have an agent that I can show you that has an adaptive card. Adaptive cards must be called through topics. So if you're going to do that, you will need to create a topic for customer creation, for instance, over here. This is not the intent clarification. I think I'd just go to or maybe this is where I put this one. Yep. So this is a kind of I did a couple of different things over here. First, if the user is asking for a customer, are you looking for instructions on making a customer or creating a customer? Then come over here and you'll see it's a little node that you can add called Ask with an Adaptive Card. And once you ask with an adaptive card, then it's going to give you a little place here to start creating your adaptive card. You can, if you know how to do JSON or write JSON, you can come over here and use the card designer or builder, and you can build it. If you don't, go the route that I said, go to ChatGPT, go to Copilot. It's going to do a fantastic job of writing this, and you'll copy and paste this schema right over here. And now it's got a customer number, customer name, all the different things you want to add. You're going to have all of this collected in the chat. The user hits submit. Everything that they've populated is stored in output variables, and then you take them and use them as input variables to populate the customer tool. So here I've used a Power Platform, the Power Automate flow. You could also have just invoked the standard tool and use these fields as inputs to populate into that particular connector. You can also, by the way, make dynamic adaptive cards. So what a dynamic adaptive card will do is, based on certain situations, it will show certain questions and so on. If you're interested in that, just reach out to me on LinkedIn afterwards, and I'll link you to a video from Microsoft that really showcases how you can make dynamic adaptive cards. This makes sure that you are seeing certain options in some situations and not other options in other situations, and it gives you even more control over the process. But adaptive cards are a lifesaver. I cannot tell you how valuable they are. Now, do keep in mind, anyway, that anytime you're working with Power FX, I do notice over here that you can utilize Power FX. Power FX in Copilot Studio is not the same as Power FX in Power Automate, Power Apps, etc. There's a limited set of things you can do with Power FX and Copilot Studio. If you want to do advanced data conversion with Power FX, invoke an agent flow. Basically, that's what used to be Power Automate flows in Copilot Studio. It's just a flow for Copilot Studio. Use that, and in that flow, you can use Power FX. So over here, I think I might have a screenshot or two that basically showing what I did before. So it shows something like this right over here, and now the user's experience is better. I want to leave you with this final tip, and then we'll have room for some questions. I want to remind you that whenever you're writing instructions or descriptions, you may not always think of instructions in the best way the first time you start to create your agent. The first way most people write instructions are like this. Let me show you some old school instructions, and this is how I've seen a lot of people writing their instructions. Like this. Assist customer service, provide guidance, etc., etc., etc. And this gives some general ideas, but you can supercharge your instructions if you basically take it back into ChatGPT, Copilot, or something else and say, these are the things I want to do with my agent. Can you help me write a better process-driven set of instructions? So it will do that for you. Another thing that Microsoft has added more recently is this area, the new agent creation. So if I say I want to create an agent that can check the weather, send an email, and create Outlook reminders, right? And if I hit enter, now these new instructions are actually doing a slightly better job, or this particular way of saying is doing a slightly better job of creating process-driven instructions. In Markdown, you can see how it does goal, action, transition. I am not a big fan of goal, action, transition, but I'll show you how I prefer to write my instructions. And also notice, by the way, this is using Markdown. Copilot Studio does understand Markdown, but you don't have to use Markdown. People who are developers naturally gravitate towards Markdown style documentation. People who are not developers, don't work a lot with GitHub, probably look at this and go, what's going on over here? So what you want to do first is either put this through AI to write instructions, or I want you to start thinking like a developer, even if you're not one. I want you to think about every single process, and I want you to think about a situation where you're hiring an assistant, a human assistant, and you need to write down for them what they are going to do on the job. So if you tell them they have to create a new customer record, how would they do it? Or let's assume they are going to manage a support desk. If you tell them they need to create a new support ticket, what do they have to do? If they have to update a support ticket, what do they have to do? If they have to escalate a support ticket, what do they have to do? How do they close a ticket? So if you can articulate in simple language all the things that are going to be done, you can write really good instructions. And then in Copilot Studio, we use tools, right? So if you're going to create a record, there's a tool for that. If you're going to update a record, there's a tool for that. So you can invoke those tools. So I want to show you one instruction that is not written with AI, but I've actually gotten a lot of good use. So this tool is actively out in use. And so if I go into another environment, and this, by the way, this agent is going to be available in open source as well in about 2 months. So if you'd like to try this hands-on, you can. So it's called my Contoso support agent. Now, this particular agent is designed to manage a support desk. And the way it does it is by first with some standard instructions, and then I'll look at the process-based instructions. So I've got different processes. They're not even in a specific order. Process, create a new support ticket, invoke, they initialize some variables, and then invoke the find one customer record. The reason we're invoking this tool is to find the customer by the email of the sender. And then we're going to invoke this. This is the information that's going to get filled, and it's done. How should it respond to a support email? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And then how does it close a support ticket? Step 1, step 2, step 3. How does it escalate? I did not use an AI tool, but what I did is I whiteboarded my scenarios. I thought about how I would have a human being answer those. This is a highly reliable agent. So I have actually done more with instructions than creating unnecessary topics and also limiting the tools that I have to create. This is not programmatic, but the performance on this is highly, highly reliable because I have taken examples where I need to. I have given it some very specific tools in what it needs to call, and then you're going to get fantastic results. So with that, if you have questions, let's take them. I've got about 3 to 4 minutes before we need to wrap up and make about 10 minutes for the next presenter. So let's open up the floor. Comments, thoughts, questions. Raise your hand or come off of mute and you'd be able to ask what you need to.
Hi AJ. Thank you first of all for the presentation and for all the tips that you presented. I have two questions that are
Yes.
that are linked to each other, but the first one is related to adaptive cards. So my thought is, if we're deploying our agent to different channels, are those channels able to handle properly the adaptive cards? And the second one is in terms of design adjustments, are we able to modify, let's say, the agent experience for the users, and to what extent?
So regarding adaptive cards, I found them to be quite flexible and responsive in size, unless you specifically decide the size. If you're creating single row adaptive cards or single column adaptive cards, you're going to get the best outcomes across various channels. You'll notice that in Teams and M365 Copilot Chat, you have a lot of real estate horizontally, so you can get as creative as you need to be. You can have more complex ones with a lot of background and design. If you are doing it for varied channels, or if you're doing for anything that is that's going to have an iframe style deployment, so web, native apps, and maybe Facebook and Slack, etc. Always imagine a scenario where it is more a portrait mode deployment. So be careful when you're choosing things with multiple columns. I avoid them. I try to create everything linear. It makes it pretty, usable. With images as well and logos, I try to make sure that they're not too wide. As long as I'm doing that, it's never been a problem. So, but that's the first part. Can you repeat the second question? I'm sorry, I forgot that.
The second one was related to visuals and design adjustments that we're able to make of the agent experience.
Yeah. I mean, if
Yeah.
it's specifically within adaptive cards, I would say just be cognizant. I think background images don't cause bleed, but if you have a logo or a horizontal image or something like, with the boarding pass you saw, I had the airline logo and those things, you might need to play with that, and you might need to go, instead of absolute sizes on those images, you might need to go with percentage style sizes. And so that can
Mhm.
dynamically scale to the percentage of real estate available. I try whenever possible to design it with the smallest real estate in mind in case my agent is being used by multiple places. As a good example, even though I may not be deploying this agent on the web, increasingly we are using more of our agents on mobile devices. So within Teams, your users might be using that. In the past, you may have noticed that M365 Copilot Chat was on phones was not using agents, or on tablets was not able to use custom built agents or declarative agents. Now they are on most device types. So I try to always design with the mobile device in mind, and I test for that and go forward from there. More questions? All right. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I invite you to connect with me, invite you to continue this conversation. I am going to stop sharing my screen. We have about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have our next session. As a matter of fact, actually, this leads us into lunch. I lost track of time. No wonder I was hungry. So we're going to break from now, and we're going to come back at 12:30 Turkish time. And that is going to be when we have our next session from Rodrigue Yengo, and that is on from solution to documentation, building a Copilot Studio agent for automated technical docs. That's going to be a real fun one. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you're enjoying our Global Power Platform Bootcamp Türkiye 2026. Enjoy your lunch. Afiyet olsun.
See you.